I'm Adam Sexton. We're still in the get-to-know-you phase of the First in the Nation primary, and candidates are introducing themselves around the state. But if you take a look at the calendar, we've made it through 4 months of 2019, and the year is a third over. Put another way, the first period of this epic playoff hockey tournament has come to a close. And here to break down the action on the home ice so far are WMUR senior political reporter John DeStaso, senior reporter from Union Leader Kevin Landrigan, and New Hampshire Public Radio politics and policy reporter Lauren Chooljian. Folks, it doesn't get more talented or distinguished than this, so you're going to get some great answers here today. No pressure, anyone.
High expectations.
We're setting it high. So let's start first with John and the big news of last week. Joe Biden is in.
Yes.
John, how big is that endorsement from former Governor John Lynch?
Well, I think it is important. It shows, you know, that right out of the gate, we have a very popular governor, four-term governor, who is right on board with Joe Biden. The only problem would be, is the party where John Lynch is right now? The party's moved to the left, and I think as the governor, no offense, governor, but I think as the governor knows, big endorsements in New Hampshire primaries, sometimes, you know, they get a lot of splash in the beginning, but ultimately, what will it mean down the road? So, certainly a good thing for Joe Biden, him and then a couple of his old friends, Chief Justice Broderick and Terry Shoemaker, Ambassador Shoemaker, jumping on right away. Those are expected, so he met expectations there.
And Kevin, Biden has run before 1987 and 2007 into 2008, but he's never actually made it to the First in the Nation primary, dropping out both times before we vote. Can he break that streak?
Oh, I think he should. I mean, what's different this time, obviously, is he's the clear front runner, as John pointed out. He's never been in that position before. That makes it easier, and that makes it harder at the same time. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's pretty obvious Biden waited as long as he did in order to get in this race, because he knows he's the target now, and the attacks will all be on him. This race will get negative, and his support can only reduce over time, and he hopefully can bounce it back.
And speaking of the target, Lauren, we know there are questions about Biden. He has a long history in politics, and a lot of that is being unpacked. What was the New York Times reporting about the Anita Hill and Clarence Thomas hearings?
Yeah, tough story to have on the day of your launch. The New York Times essentially called Anita Hill and said and learned that he had called her basically in his conversations with his team and thinking himself about running for president. This is obviously a big obstacle for him, the way when he led the committee that interviewed Anita Hill when she testified against Clarence Thomas in 1991. And what was reported was basically that he had called, and I want to get this right here because the words are so important, that he wanted to share his regret for what she endured. And so she took that to mean this was not an apology. And she said to the New York Times she was very unsatisfied by this response and that she wouldn't be supporting him, and that basically what she wanted was accountability for herself and all the women, she says, that were not able to testify during those hearings. And I think the Anita Hill is one of the big obstacles that we've heard way before Biden announced last week. Another one is he was very tough on crime in the late 80s and 90s. Another one is that the party is moving in one direction and he, like John was saying, is staying right there in the middle.
Yeah, in politics we like to say explaining is losing, but winning presidential candidates always explain their way out of issues, and Biden is certainly going to have to do that with that. Right. Let's head over to the Republicans. Big speech last week from Governor Larry Hogan of Maryland, who came here and did politics and eggs. Lauren, you were there in the room. Give us a sense of very interesting, different kind of speech and different kind of press gaggle afterwards.
Yeah, he started off the speech with he said to his friends in the media, which, you know, let's keep that was a hilarious opening, that he wanted to talk to his friends in the media to say he's not going to be making any big announcement of whether he'll run or not. And then he gave a pretty quiet, nice speech about what he's done in Maryland, how he's, you know, the only Republican governor to be reelected to a second term, and look how well I've done in such a blue state. And then it wasn't until the questions when it got kind of a little bit fiery with President Trump. You know, he was asked by a Boston reporter, you know, are you frustrated by other Republicans who don't come out and speak against the president? And he said that, yes, it was very frustrating and that he really wished that they would be more out front like he has been. He talked about how he doesn't feel any pressure, like you mentioned, to run now, and that he is going to think about it for a while, but he's going to really take his time because as a candidate who maybe wouldn't have a lot of money, there's a lot of race left to run, and so he could save a lot of money that way by entering late. But then then what was really spicy, I would say, is that somebody asked him, are you worried about the wrath of Trump, so to speak, that so many other, Democratic candidates have been seeing, or any Republicans who go against him? And he basically said, well, I fought cancer for 18 months, so I'm sure I can take it, which I thought was pretty quick.
And he did say at one point that when addressing the Mueller report, he was very tough and said that what he read about Trump in the Mueller report did not make him proud to be a Republican or proud to be not proud to be anywhere near Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And then he wouldn't even commit, I believe, to voting for Donald Trump ultimately. So, he was as tough on Trump as the declared alternative candidate, Bill Weld, has been. But Bill Weld is a candidate, and Larry Hogan at this point is not. He sounded like he's wants to be, but we'll see. He
definitely sounded like he wanted to do it. He said he's going to wait until November, though. He also said, Kevin, he doesn't want to go on a political suicide mission. But isn't that, by definition, what challenging a sitting president in your own party is? There's nobody who's actually knocked them off before, at least in modern history. Right.
That's true, Adam. I think what he means really by that is he doesn't intend to ruin his political career by whatever he ends up doing. And I suspect he won't ruin his political career by whatever he decides to do. He's one of the 3 most popular governors in the country, according to the latest surveys, and isn't somebody who's afraid of the political establishment. I mean, he took on Steny Hoyer for Congress, lost, did pretty well for him, but Hoyer's as big a name in Maryland as Sununu and Shaheen are in New Hampshire. So he's not cowed by Trump. He didn't endorse Trump in 2016, supported Chris Christie. I don't think Trump is really going to figure into whether he runs or not. It's going to be, as both Lauren and John said, whether this makes sense for him, whether he can raise the money and also keep enough oxygen in the room to really make a difference in this race.
But he clearly did not say that he would only get in if he feels he can win.
I was just thinking about that. He made this distinction that he was different from Weld.
What's the bar for Larry Hogan? Is it the Pat Buchanan bar from the 1992 where Buchanan got 38%? I mean, is his goal to bring down Trump, to help the Democratic side? What does Larry Hogan really want? Because I really don't think that Larry Hogan believes, he might, but that he's actually going to be the nominee unless something really tremendously bad for the president, even more than what we've seen, happens down the road.
Well, certainly he believes that he has time on his side. Let's shift gears to the 2016 winner of the New Hampshire primary on the Democratic side, Bernie Sanders, and we'll start with you, Kevin. We haven't seen a lot of Bernie Sanders lately. What are his supporters saying right now? Do they want to see more of him here?
Yeah, sure, they do. It's one of the reasons why when he's not here virtually every weekend, they have these organizing events where you basically go and watch a speech by him at another venue other than New Hampshire, and you talk about how we can keep this thing going. One thing we've always seen in New Hampshire is it's never the same the second time around, even if you win. The second time around when you run in New Hampshire, you can't run the same campaign you ran the first time. And invariably, a lot of your supporters are unhappy with that because there's nothing like the first time when you fell in love with this candidate and followed him all over the place. And even if you went down in flames, it was a real emotional event. And I think a number of Sanders supporters understand this can't be like it was the last time if he's going to be successful ultimately, even winning the nomination, much less going on beyond that.
And Lauren, you've been digging into the history of the New Hampshire primary. What do we know about neighboring state candidates who've come to New Hampshire and run from, say, Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont?
Well, the experts here know this better than I do, but I will say that I think it was a neighbor who broke our streak, right? We had a streak long running that a president had to win New Hampshire, or did win New Hampshire, and Paul Tsongas from Massachusetts was the one that broke that streak in '92. Of course, what we all really remember is the comeback kid. Bill Clinton was the quote-unquote winner, even though he came in second. But this time around, we're going to have a lot of neighbors, right? We've got Sanders, like you mentioned, Warren, Weld, who am I missing? Moulton.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you have 4 neighbors, some with more name recognition than others, there may be a different split. But I'm going to quote Kevin Landrigan for the rest of my life and saying that the first time, there's nothing like the first time. So it may not be like that for Bernie Sanders.
The expectation is that Bernie Sanders has to win the New Hampshire primary. One of these neighboring candidates, the pressure is on each one of them. Maybe not so much Moulton, but certainly on Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders to win not to come in second or, you know, be able to spin. I finished a strong third or fourth. The expectation, I'm sorry, unless maybe Kevin disagrees, is to win.
Absolutely is. It absolutely is. And that's what, remember what happened with Hillary, you know, and not too long ago, you know, when she did so well here against Obama in 08, everybody assumed she's going to kick everybody's tail 4 years later, and was humiliated here, but still went on to win the nomination. So, as Lauren pointed out, it's not a straight line anymore for these neighboring candidates. But I agree with John. It's a big ask for Sanders to repeat in 2020, but politically he has to.
He has to at least finish first. Certainly the percentage isn't going to be where it was with the two-person race, but he has to win. So he has to figure out, how am I going to ride this out on my reputation and the goodwill that I have among my supporters, or with this big crowded field, is he going to get here and actually campaign like New Hampshire style?
What do you think, though, that he's going to follow the Trump model and do the big rallies and just try and do it that way? And that's what Trump did, was able to consolidate that 20 to 30% and ride it.
That seems to be his shtick, if you will. And that seems to be the way he likes to campaign.
Well, he did a lot of that 4 years ago, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
That's
at the end of the
pretty much
day,
all it was 4 years ago.
that's what Barack Obama did in 08. People forget that.
True.
There weren't a lot of house parties after the first month or two for Barack Obama. He had a good act, and it was really popular. And the same happened with Bernie.
There'll be some Bernie Sanders retail sort of photo op type things where he goes into a store or something somewhere down the road. But the real campaigning will be done, I think, still the way Bernie's always done it, which is the big crowds, you know, and the fired up Bernie.
Once it gets off the ground, it's hard to get it back into that house party bottle. So we're going to continue this conversation after the break. We'll be right back with our esteemed panel, and we'll try to read the Bill Gardner tea leaves to determine if the primary date might be moving up into January. Stay with us.